The Dark Gods by Anthony Roberts and Jeff Gilbertson. Part 2, Chapter 1, The Cosmic Connection, continuation on H.P. Lovecraft. In the higher reaches of what might be termed Lovecraftian metaphysics, there is to be found a curious blending of rational analysis with psychic intuition, which in itself produces a unique balancing harmony and reveals the true measure of the man. The checks and balances system predominates throughout the whole experience of creation. Doubtless the rational Lovecraft would have violently disagreed with these conclusions. Although he evolved an abstruse mythology based on the interaction of cosmic forces and living matter, H.P. Lovecraft was never obscure in his literary exposition. His stories and poems are all easy to read and assimilate, although the prose does tend to become over-ornate in certain major passages. However, many great writers have been overcome with verbosity, and it is a cardinal sin among those who expound upon mystical and esoteric matters. This in no way detracts from the power and relevance of such writings, for subjects that contain the essence of total realization demand a rich and expressive use of literary flamboyance. After all, the universe itself is a far from prosaic place, for contained within its joyous patterns, there exists every form of splendor and glory that needs strong words to convey its endless beauty and meaning. The English language is remarkably flexible, and its prose is a more than adequate medium for expressing such beauty and meaning. Lovecraft was highly adept in his use of English, writing in a style that eloquently captured the cadences of his chosen subject. It is this subject that will be thoroughly examined as this book proceeds, and there will be little literary austerity here either. The pattern of ultra-terrestrial recognition has never been broken since Lovecraft's untimely death, and this is a very important point. The linking thread of psychic inspiration that runs throughout his tales has hovered around the threshold of the human mind for a very long time indeed. But for the last 50 years, it has been increasingly externalized in the form of imaginative fiction. As noted before, the idea that the human race shares the cosmos with a multiplicity of alien and even extracosmic entities has been common throughout history through the medium of myth and folklore focused by means of magic. In some past eras, it has been predominant, for example, in early classical antiquity, Sumeria, Babylonia, Greece, Rome, Persia, etc., while in other more mundane centuries, it has faded into a cultural and metaphysical outlawry, often hidden behind thick veils of occultism and mysticism. However, one main theme has remained constant, and it surfaces in nearly all the esoteric philosophies in every country on Earth. H.P. Lovecraft's interpretation of this archaic myth forms the nexus of his occult philosophy and his imaginative writings. The following statement provides the basic rationale. All of my stories, unconnected as they may be, are based on the fundamental lore or legend that this world was inhabited at one time by other races, who in practicing black magic lost their foothold and were expelled, yet live on outside, ever ready to take possession of this earth again. It must be re-emphasized that in many respects Lovecraft conformed to those confusingly dangerous patterns of the widespread contactee syndrome. But there is a crucial difference. Unlike the majority of cases to be discussed in this book, H.P. Lovecraft in a sense saw true, divining the correct nature of the ultra-terrestrial phenomenon and transmitting it in a then necessarily fictitious literary form. This strangely tormented writer recognized, through his externally sent dreams and personal intuitions, that there was a tremendously hostile, anti-human aspect to the phenomenal reality of the open universe. That is why he has been dwelt upon at such length here. The man's subjective and objective crystallizations show him as a perfect fulcrum for the endlessly balancing cyclic movements of cosmic consciousness. In the case of the gentleman from Providence, Rhode Island, the dark gods made a gross miscalculation because his keen mind and dauntless spirit overthrew their often cruelly vicious attacks and allowed him to reveal to an incredulous world the true nature of their ravening, incarnate evil. One last point pertaining to Lovecraft ties in with Albert Bender's statement in his book that he was transported astrally to a UFO base in the Antarctic. Lovecraft, too, located the continent of Antarctica as an ancient landing point for extraterrestrial entities. In one of his best novellas, At the Mountains of Madness, 1931, he recounts the finding by a modern scientific expedition of a lost city, geomantically shaped from Antarctic mountains, whose inhabitants, the great Old Ones, emigrated to Earth millions of years ago. The Old Ones were totally non-human in appearance and commanded mighty intellects, being possessed of developed psychic powers. They also practiced a form of astral projection. Lovecraft's fiction and Bender's fact here corroborate one another, and this is often the case, as John Keel has discovered when investigating the finer points of the kaleidoscopic contactee syndrome. Another writer who has dealt at length with the influence of the ultra-terrestrials is the great lay theologian Clive Staples Lewis, 1898 to 1963. Lewis, a close friend of that other master of mythological reality, Professor J.R.R. Tolkien, started his intellectual career as an agnostic and slowly developed a fine religious perception encapsulated within the parameters of Anglican Christianity. But C.S. Lewis was always an unorthodox thinker, and his Anglicanism was always liberally tempered with large amounts of almost Gnostic doctrine. Lewis was another writer who disguised his objective knowledge under the subjective trappings of imaginative fiction. But unlike H.P. Lovecraft, Lewis maintained, both publicly and privately, that much of his fiction was deliberate allegory, reflecting his genuine religious beliefs in a more generally assimilable form. In a remarkable trilogy comprising the novels Out of the Silent Planet, Perelandra, and That Hideous Strength, Lewis created a whole cosmological milieu, which drew heavily upon the ancient tradition that the earth lay under the spell of demonic entities, exponents of dark chaos, who were at perpetual war with the forces of light and harmonic order. Lewis called his entities Eldils, and saw them as angelic beings who interacted with humanity in the long struggle for psychic dominance in the structure of creation. As the books progress, the hero, Ransom, a philologist who might have been based on Tolkien, is carried off this planet to Mars and Venus respectively, encountering many forms of extraterrestrial life, as well as the extracosmic Eldils. The significantly named Ransom is told by the good Eldil's angels that the Earth, the silent planet, is under cosmic interdict because of the evil activities of its bent Eldils. He is also told that the human race has a vital part to play in the liberation of its homeland by recognizing the nature of its dark oppressors and combining against them in concert with the straight Eldils, who are the military legions of the Godhead, here called Malodil. In the final novel of the trilogy, That Hideous Strength, Ransom is back on Earth, this time as a transcendent figure, fully initiated, purged of all evil, and known as the Pendragon. It appears that this archaic title, descended from Atlantean and Arthurian myth, is forever borne by the leader of righteousness on Earth, and anyone in his entourage is helped by the good Eldils in the endless conflict against the bad. What makes That Hideous Strength especially relevant to this book is the charting by Lewis of many of the techniques of oppression employed by the Black Eldils, what we now term the Dark Gods. In the preface to his novel, Lewis admits to using the trappings of a fairy story, a term that needs some drastic rehabilitation, but also makes the point that the tale is to be seen as an extension of his deeply held religious views, expounded in his work on the nature of evil, the abolition of man. In That Hideous Strength, The bent elders make a grandstand play for a final takeover of the planet and all its inhabitants. They influence a number of human, if you can call them that, scientists, who set up a vast and hideous organization called the NICE, National Institute for Coordinated Experiments. The NICE then infects a university and corrupts all its scholars before embarking on a campaign of ruthless violence and intimidation in the name of a genuinely dehumanized scientific objectivity. This is really Lewis's version of the Illuminati conspiracy theory that was mentioned earlier and will be developed later in the book. The focal point for the ultra-terrestrial intrusion in Lewis's book is the severed head of Alcazan, an executed murderer, which has been infused with the satanic spirit who leads the dark angels. It can be remembered here that one of the great mystical secret societies of history, the mysterious Knights Templar, were also supposed to have worshipped an oracular and dismembered head. Towards the end of that hideous strength, there is an illuminating dialogue between two of the main characters in which one of the ruined and dehumanized scientists discusses his concept of the ultra-terrestrials with a man who is loosely related to the Pendragon faction. "Do you mean Alcazan is really dead?" asked Mark. His surprise at Frost's last statement needed no acting. "In the present state of our knowledge," said Frost, "there is no answer to that question. Probably it has no meaning. But the cortex and vocal organs in Alcazan's head are used by a different mind. And now, please, attend very carefully. You have probably not heard of macrobes." "I did not say microbes, I said macrobes. The formation of the word explains itself. Below the level of animal life, we have long known that there are microscopic organisms. Their actual results on human life, in respect of health and disease, have, of course, made up a large part of history. The secret cause was not known till we invented the microscope." "Go on," said Mark. Ravenous curiosity was moving like a sort of groundswell beneath his conscious determination to stand on guard. "I have now to inform you that there are similar organisms above the level of animal life. When I say above, I am not speaking biologically. The structure of the microbe, so far as we know it, is of extreme simplicity. When I say that it is above the animal level, I mean that it is more permanent, disposes of more energy, and has greater intelligence." "More intelligent than the highest anthropoids?" said Mark. "It must be pretty nearly human then." "You have misunderstood me. When I said it transcended the animals, I was, of course, including the most efficient animal, man. The microbe is more intelligent than man. But how is it in that case that we have had no communication with them? It is not certain that we have not. But in primitive times it was spasmodic and was opposed by numerous prejudices. Moreover, the intellectual development of man had not reached the level at which intercourse with our species could offer any attractions to a microbe. But though there has been little intercourse, there has been profound influence. Their effect on human history has been far greater than that of the microbes, though, of course, equally unrecognized. In the light of what we now know, all history will have to be rewritten. The real causes of all the principal events are quite unknown to the historians. That, indeed, is why history has not yet succeeded in becoming a science. The vocal organs and brain taken from Alcazan," he continued, "have become the conductors of a regular intercourse between the macrobes and our own species. I do not say that we have discovered this technique. The discovery was theirs, not ours. The circle to which you may be admitted is the organ of that cooperation between the two species which has already created a new situation for humanity. The change, you will see, is far greater than that which turned the sub-man into the man. It is more comparable to the first appearance of organic life." "These organisms then," said Mark, "are friendly to humanity?" "If you reflect for a moment," said Frost, you will see that your question has no meaning except on the level of the crudest popular thought. Friendship is a chemical phenomenon. So is hatred. Both of them presuppose organisms of our own type. The first step towards intercourse with the macrobes is the realization that one must go outside the whole world of our subjective emotions. It is only as you begin to do so that you discover how much of what you mistook for your thought was merely a byproduct of your blood and nervous tissues. This telling and appallingly sad piece of description is C.S. Lewis's way of delivering his warning about the cunning manipulation of human minds and souls by the UT phenomenon. Even though the character Frost has almost understood what the game is really all about, it has been put into his mind in a manner that perfectly suits his obsessive frame of reference that is, the terminology of a soulless, emotionless science. He perceives the UTS as macrobes, something like superstar microbes on a macrocosmic scale. They are, of course, the black angels or dark Eldils of the trilogy's interesting cosmology, who seek to exterminate the bulk of humanity and feed on the controlled life energies of the remaining elite. In the end, they are heavily defeated by the combined forces of the magically motivated Pendragon faction and the pure power of the beatific angels. The living earth itself literally rises up against them in a purifying apocalypse of physical violence. No bad thing in this context. Although C.S. Lewis novelized his cosmological vision, the foregoing has surely proved how it forms a major part of the orthodox concept of metaphysical power politics, as practiced on and around this planet for millennia. A great deal of spiritual profundity has been carried in the advancing wave of imaginative fiction that has been gathering momentum throughout the 20th century. The final volume of the Eldils trilogy was published in 1945, as the Second World War was dramatically ending in the bunker under blazing Berlin. It is no coincidence that many researchers into the occult feel that the Nazis, and through them the whole German people, were possessed by the dark gods and used in such a manner as almost to implement what C.S. Lewis describes so eloquently in his fictional work. The demons that plague humanity are ever hungry, their appetites being insatiable because of their very nature. Energy needs energy to sustain itself, and the eco-social systems of this planet form ideal batteries from which they can draw much of their vital sustenance. To combat such forces, a pure form of counter-energy must be generated, and it is the channeled and consciously pooled spiritual resources of the human race that can provide the collective psychic gun, blasting the ultra-terrestrials back into the chaotic hell they have sprung from. But more of this spiritual libertarianism later in the book. The existence and purpose of our dark gods, or ultra-terrestrial phenomena, or demonic spirits, etc., have now been surveyed in some detail, and the scene has been set for the charting of their long campaign through the annals of exact documentation. But before the reader launches into Jeff Gilbertson's section of this book, two more important points must be made. The first point concerns where they originated from in the first place. It is here that the argument becomes somewhat ambiguous, not to say tenuous, because an exact answer regarding UT origins is impossible to formulate outside a multi-volume epic synthesizing all religion, philosophy, and science, and this is well beyond the scope or ability of the present writer. However, tentative conclusions can be drawn based upon the wealth of religious lore that has accumulated over the centuries, specifically that which has remained comparatively uncontaminated by the machinations of our cosmic tormentors. In the teachings of the Hebrew Kabbalah, one of the most respected of the Western mystery traditions, it is said that evil begins when creation is implemented from the source of the ineffable Godhead. Before creation, there is only the all-pervading will of God, but with the emergence into existence of the creational universe, there comes the first partition from divinity. Creation is really a reflection of the energy emanations flowing from the life-giving aspects of the divine spirit. Because it is somewhat detached from the prime mover's immediate presence, a measure of free will or choice is inevitably introduced. Certain entities or spirits, headed by Lucifer, greatest but most evil of angels, contracted the twin diseases of pride and envy, and misused the two-edged power of choice, so starting on the long road to perpetual damnation. Here is a possible beginning of the UT phenomenon, couched in almost orthodox religious terms. The ever-developing nature of evil is multifaceted and usually superficially glamorous because of the overweening pride reflected through misuse of power for its own sake. It appears to get quick results, and incidentally, it is actually easier to be evil than it is to be good. Simplistic though this may sound, it is a fact. Most people find it easier to condemn someone than to praise them. Harsh insults glide more quickly from most tongues than sympathetic accolades. A human being can be killed in a flash. It takes 9 months to produce one. This deceptive simplicity contains the very essence of true evil, which is actually free will without any corresponding compassion or ethical responsibility. It is really what Blake would have called the power of empty reason, reason without a pure, religious dimension, seducing goodness through its semblance of freedom, which is really license and leads into the arms of chaos. In one sense, extinction of the soul might be considered as a form of freedom. When demons offer such freedom in their pacts, they mean license to behave in a manner that inevitably eradicates freedom in other forms, and soul extinction, or its opposite, eternal torment, is the final price to be paid when evil claims its own in the end. So says tradition. Evil is really the perversion of free will through the corruption of choice. It is a cosmic abomination because it interrupts and misdirects the continuous harmonious flow of divine perception and coalescence. The pushing of this basic form of evil, this false pride and spurious freedom, is one of the dark god's most persuasive lines of sales patter, because it is inherent in their own natures, through choice, always to move further away from the Godhead. They feel compelled to ensure that every other form of living and soul being does the same, but in fact the choice is removed from their victim's sphere of reference. It is a well-known maxim that the devil wants only slaves, not equals. There is no freedom in slavery, and so the true deceit and malice of the forces of evil are revealed. The Kabbalistic teachings, which are actually a distillation of metaphysical doctrines drawn from a variety of antique cultures, divide the formation of the evil forces in creation into three main categories. The first has been examined. The second is the necessary evil of decay and death, which facilitates the transitional cyclic movements of unfolding growth in spiritual, animal, vegetable, and mineral forms. The third is where the most likely explanation for the demonic UT forces originated. It is worth quoting here from a recent book by the Kabbalistic scholar Warren Kenton, The Anatomy of Fate, writer, 1978, where he makes these explicit statements. The third kind of evil is that of chaos. This, we are told by tradition, relates to the remnants of previous creations that were discarded by God as the Creator experimented with existence. There are supposed to have been at least 6 models prior to our present universe. The effect of these residual factors is that as unattached positive and negative forces and forms, they become the demonic hosts that seek to attack and either enter and dominate creation or steal from it and set up their own universe. In traditional terms, they are viewed as the opposition of chaos to the order of creation. Kabbalistic tradition says that everything we do contributes to one side or the other of the celestial battle, that the human race alone has the ability to influence the cosmic balance from below. Thus, a person can, because of an act of free will, individually affect the efforts of the angels and demons. The last statement is where the beneficial and uncorrupted aspects of free will can assume their correct place in the order of existence. The first explanatory paragraph pinpoints a possible source for our dark gods, certainly as far as the ancient Judeo-Christian traditions are concerned. Incidentally, this metaphysical explanation is echoed in many of the world's great religions and philosophical systems in various poetic and expositional disguises. The ultra-terrestrial or demonic interference form of evil can affect any culture or species anywhere in the universe, using any one of its multifarious disguises. The affliction of Earth and its life forms has up to now been promulgated through primarily spiritual patterns, but with the gradual decline of the spiritual and the subsequent vacuum-filling rise of the technological, both terms that can be widely interpreted, the onslaught has been subtly changed. The main instruments of that change have been the recently ubiquitous flying saucers, or UFOs, and the main UT control techniques have been well charted in the works of John Keel, Jacques Vallée, etc. A great deal of evidence for the psychic interpretation of UFOs is steadily amassing, and a steady stream of UT-oriented books is flowing from publishers throughout the world. A hopeful sign, but there is another more overtly physical facet to the UFO enigma that must not be completely ignored. That is the original premise that certain sightings could be the craft of advanced extraterrestrial cultures who are regularly visiting this planet. The last important thread to be drawn into this part of the book necessitates another look at contemporary UFO activity. This time, we must look at data that might relate to actual visitations to Earth by advanced physical cultures from nearby stars. With the immense upsurge of interest in UFOs, mainly precipitated by such films as Star Wars, and more specifically Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the late 70s has surely been a seminal period for UFO studies. Although the ultra-terrestrial answer holds most favor at the moment, there seems to be little doubt that some of the sightings must be the craft of some vastly complex technical civilization that has perhaps been drawn to the Earth to monitor the growth of our own embryonic technology. Although many reports in the newspapers and other media still follow the ancient pattern of fairy-like paraphysical phenomena, others seem more firmly grounded in what has come to be called, somewhat prosaically, the nuts and bolts explanation. If some of these latter sightings are examined, it can be seen that close encounters of the third kind do seem to be sporadically occurring, adding yet another strange dimension to the unfolding UFO mystery. To illustrate graphically the more conventional, if you can call anything pertaining to UFOs conventional, flying saucer experience, it is only necessary to recount a broad cross-section of up-to-date sightings. Most of the following stories are recently gathered from the pages of two major, if popular, English newspapers, the Daily Express and the Sun. What is more, they all appeared in the columns of these newspapers in the month of February 1978, and all of the sightings are vouched for by the papers themselves after having been checked by various UFO experts. The witnesses are of the reliable, intelligent, down-to-earth variety, many being professional men and women who are usually noted for calm observational abilities and basic common sense. Even with this sort of background, the stories are still amazing experiences that make a disturbing impact upon the sensibilities of any open-minded evaluator. Few have been gathered into book form before, and they are mainly occurrences that have manifested over the last few years. Although these examples have been selected because they contain a great deal of physical evidence pointing towards an extraterrestrial explanation, the observant reader will notice some darker ambiguities hovering around them. The encounters document classic-type UFO craft, yet some of the manifestations also contain the older symptoms of ultra-terrestrial manipulation. Buzzings, flashing lights, phantom-like figures, all are included and mesh with the more technological aspects. At the end of this section, a partial answer to this seeming dichotomy will be postulated, but first let us examine the close encounters themselves. Encounter 1. Fitting to the confusing nature of the subject, Encounter 1 is really a series of encounters that took place in a single geographical area. This area is known in the popular press as the Welsh Triangle, in fully conscious homage to the infamous Bermuda Triangle in the Western Atlantic, where similar events have been known on a much wider scale. The Welsh Triangle has its apex in mid-Wales, its two outer points being Broadhaven and Swansea. Within this compass of land, a great many UFOs have recently appeared, and it begins to look as if a number of John Keel's window areas are now congregated in this part of Wales. On the 4th of February 1977, the peace of a primary school in Broadhaven was rudely shattered when 14 of its pupils reported to headmaster Ralph Llewellyn that they had seen a silver spaceship land in a field just 400 yards from the school. Mr. Llewellyn got his pupils to draw what they had seen, and the drawings all tallied in the major details. The craft was a silvery cigar shape with a saucer-like dome on its back, supporting a flashing red light. A number of the children said a very tall figure in a silver suit was standing alongside the vessel. There was much media coverage, and the children never wavered in their collective story. It has now been accepted that this sighting was certainly not a hoax. One curious side effect of this landing is that 2 months later, a spare military fuel tank, 25 feet tall, was delivered to the school playground one morning, and Mr. Llewellyn discovered his children excitedly gathered around it when he arrived. It has now been converted into a Finn space rocket and was painted red, white, and blue for the Queen's Jubilee celebrations. No one knows how it arrived at the school, or, more pertinently, who or what delivered it. On 24th February 1977, note the significant date Alakeel, Mrs. Pauline Coombs, a farmer's wife who lives at Ripperton Farm, 4 miles from the Broadhaven School, was terrified to find her car being followed by a bright ball of light the size of a football. On 24th April, while watching the late-night film with her husband, Mrs. Coombs heard a noise at the window, and on investigating, they both discovered a 7-foot-tall man in a silver suit staring in at them. He promptly vanished. When they apprehensively ventured outside in the morning, they discovered that the previously thriving rose bushes under the window were all suddenly dead. Later that summer, the Coombs 8-year-old twins saw the same silver giant when they were playing in a field near the farm. They said his silver suit had no buttons, zips, or fastenings, and that he walked in a slow, laborious fashion and passed through a barbed wire fence without breaking it. Again, when checked out, these odd stories passed the validity test. They all saw something. Still in the Welsh Triangle, in 1977, 2 company directors, Elvet Dyer and Peter Bevan, were driving between Carmarthen and Newcastle Emlyn one morning when they were disturbed to see a strange, unknown flying machine pass across the road at a very low level. They described the machine as a 20-foot-long cigar shape, flying low enough to have removed the top from a double-decker bus. The craft had no wings, tail, fins, or cockpit, and made no sound whatsoever. It moved slowly into a nearby field, but when the 2 men stopped to look, it had vanished. Up to then, both men were convinced unbelievers in UFOs. Now their skepticism has been severely shaken. There have been more than 50 positive sightings of flying saucers in the Welsh Triangle, and they have all been verified by local investigative bureau and the National Clearinghouse for Such Information. BUFORA, British UFO Research Association. Encounter 2. The next story appeared in the Daily Express on the 14th of February, 1978. It is a classic UFO kidnap tale, and it was released from the files of Contact UK, one of the largest and most authoritative British groups investigating the elusive UFO conundrum. Mrs. G, she prefers to remain anonymous for fear of ridicule, often a wise decision, stated that she was hanging out washing in her garden when the visitation occurred. She lives in Ermington, near Plymouth, and it can be stated here that the whole of southwestern England is notorious for its number of confirmed UFO sightings, which are far beyond any chance statistical average. The first thing that made Mrs. G realize her conventional world was toppling was when a large blue light moved over her house from a northerly direction. The light, which was exceptionally brilliant, hovered over her garden, and she was enveloped in numerous bubbles of light that descended around her. She then saw three humanoid beings looking down upon her, and they were about 5 feet tall and wearing metallic blue suits. The beings grasped Mrs. G by the arms, and she was lifted up by what she describes as a beam of light into a room where more beings awaited. She received a telepathic impression that she would come to no harm, and a little later found herself back on her lawn. She then felt a sharp blow on the back of the neck which stunned her. After this, the UFO vanished dramatically into the sky at high speed. There is no reason to doubt this woman's story, and she has never had any experiences like this before or since. Bernard Dallaire of Contact UK has stated publicly that the report is authentic and is to be taken very seriously indeed. Encounter 3. This sighting was reported in the Daily Express on 21st February 1978, and it concerns an experienced commercial pilot. Captain Freddie Underhill, who flew for British Caledonian, was making a routine flight back to Britain in a DC-6 out of Tangiers. While crossing the Pyrenees early in the morning, Captain Underhill was suddenly aware of a fast-moving object traveling from west to east above the mountains. He describes it as a long cigar-shaped machine, obviously under intelligent control and flying at a very high speed. The first officer and engineer on the aircraft witnessed the UFO, and as they all watched, it abruptly turned towards them and flew under their starboard wing. Then it disappeared. Captain Underhill can offer no rational explanation for this sighting, but he took many photographs of the phenomenon. Encounter 4. This concerns two soldiers of the Royal Armoured Corps who were involved in an army exercise on the Yorkshire moors. It was recorded in the Sun newspaper on the 20th of February 1978. Troopers Michael Perrin and Titch Carville were driving a Land Rover when the UFO appeared, and they halted the car to watch it. Mike Perrin described the machine as silvery, the size of about 5 Land Rovers and dome-shaped. He said it had a series of portholes and was internally lit by flashing red and white lights. It was hovering roughly 50 yards away from the men and emitting an odd buzzing noise. When Perrin tried to start his Land Rover, there was no response. The vehicle was totally dead. After 5 minutes hovering, the UFO rose up into the sky, and power then returned to the motor. The next morning, the two men went back to the area with a sergeant and found a large circle of burnt grass where the flying saucer had been hovering. Encounter 5. This was recorded in the Daily Express on the 24th of February, 1978, and the incident took place over Salisbury Plain in November 1977. PC Christopher Bazier and WPC Vivian White were on a routine Panda car patrol when they both saw the UFO. It was moving very slowly at an altitude of about 500 feet. They described the object as oblong with a large dome top and a flat bottom. As they observed it, there was a sudden change of motion, and the object took off at an incredible speed, leaving a pronounced vapor trail or contrail behind it. Encounter 6. Again, children are involved, this time in Scotland. The story appearing in the Sun on the 20th of February 1978. Fiona Morrison and Karen McLennan, both aged 10, were playing on a building site adjacent to a wood near Elgin in northeast Scotland. A group of boys suddenly ran past them shouting that a flying saucer has just landed. The two girls joined the boys, and they all saw the UFO hovering in the wood. Fiona described it as looking like a silver-colored saucer with a dome on top and flashing an orange-reddish light. Karen said she saw a tall figure wearing a silver suit standing alongside the craft. Karen's mother, Mrs. Caroline McLennan, who was nearby in her home, relates that she heard a loud whirring or buzzing at the same time as the children's sighting. While the group of youngsters watched, the UFO rose above the wood and then took off swiftly into the sky. A circular patch of grass in the wood was discovered flattened, and the trees beside it were found to be scorched. Encounter 7. In the Daily Express of 22nd February 1978, Mrs. Helen Cooper from Sunbury-on-Thames reported that 2 weeks before she had seen a cigar-shaped UFO. She described it as about 40 feet long and rotating. It was high in the sky and therefore could have been considerably larger than the estimated 40 feet. Mrs. Cooper studied the UFO for half an hour with her daughter, and then, in a flash, she saw what she described as a shooting star drop out of the sky and merge with the stationary cigar ship. The object then vanished into a thick bank of cloud. Many UFOs seem to adopt cloud disguises. It is a major part of the whole phenomenon and is well fictionalized in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Encounter 8. It happened at Fordingbridge, Hampshire, in January 1978. According to the Daily Express of 24th February, Brian and Susan Stovold were driving through the New Forest when they saw a massive stationary object above them. They stopped to observe and counted 7 red and blue lights blazing around the UFO's outer rim. They also noted a humped, tank-like turret situated on its top. The couple observed the mysterious aerial visitor for 10 minutes, after which they say it glided silently away in a perfectly straight line. Encounter 9. Mrs. Paula Lonsdale related her curious experience in the Daily Express of 21st February 1978. She was attending to her baby daughter one night in her home at Upper Beeding, Sussex. Glancing out of the bedroom window, she was surprised to see a big cigar-shaped something floating across her garden about 20 feet from the window. There were red and blue flashing lights, yet no sound. Abruptly, as she stared in wonder, the thing vanished. Encounter 10. The case to be studied here is one of the most spectacular ever recorded. Although published in the Daily Express on the 27th of February 1978, the story is older, having come from the secret files of the Iranian Air Force via equally classified files in the USA. The Express puts no date on this story, but the events recorded are similar to many that languish in the files of dozens of air forces. The encounter began one night when hundreds of people in northern Iran noticed a huge, dazzling light hanging high in the sky. In Tehran, the Iranian Air Force telephoned Assistant Deputy Commissioner B.G. Yousefi and informed him of the mass sighting. Mr. Yousefi ordered out a Phantom jet fighter from the Sharoki Air Base to investigate the UFO, which was then approximately 70 miles north of Tehran. When the plane had flown to within 30 miles of the UFO, all its complex communications and instrumentation systems went dead. The worried pilot had no alternative but quickly to return to base. As soon as the aircraft began its return flight, the technical systems all returned to normal working order. But that's only half the story. A second Phantom fighter was ordered out from the Sharoki base, this time flown by a Lieutenant Fafari. He left at 1:40 a.m. As this second hunter closed in on the UFO, the highly luminous object began to accelerate away swiftly. The radar screen in the fighter revealed the UFO to be as large as a Boeing 707 passenger transport plane. The chase then took a trajectory heading south of Tehran, And although the Phantom is capable of flying at more than twice the speed of sound, approximately 1,400 miles per hour, it was effortlessly outrun by the UFO. Suddenly, the huge Enigma released a small, disc-shaped object which was also glowing with a brilliant white light. This smaller saucer came straight towards Lieutenant Fafari's Phantom. The pilot tried to fire an AIM-9 air-to-air missile at his attacker, but at that moment all his electronic systems, including the weapons control panel, blacked out. Diving to avoid the saucer, the puzzled pilot found that it had locked on to him and could not be shaken off. The small UFO then curved directly into the flight path of the Phantom, turned, and flew back to its mothership. Lieutenant Fafari again attempted to intercept the large craft, and as he did so, his instruments suddenly came back into operation. As the Iranian pilot closed in, a second saucer left the parent ship and dived steeply towards the ground. It came to rest in the foothills below and threw out a white glare that was estimated as being 2 miles in diameter. While investigating this second effect, which quickly vanished, Lieutenant Fafari lost the bigger ship, which sped up into the night sky and disappeared. When the Iranian government informed the Americans of these singular events, they instantly classified the whole affair. It has only now been released to add a further important piece to the vast UFO puzzle. Encounter 11. This story stems from Mineral Wells, West Virginia, USA, and the events occurred on the 2nd of November, 1966. They have subsequently become well known in the general files of ufology. Mr. Woodrow Derenberger, a sewing machine salesman, witnessed a UFO land on the main road, Interstate 77, right in front of him. From the charcoal gray craft there appeared a man, 6 feet tall, with very dark complexion, long hair, and slanted, oriental-like eyes. The being was dressed in a dark coat and shiny greenish trousers. After some uneasy social intercourse, Mr. Derenberger was informed that the flying saucer occupant's name was Cold, and the area he came from was, curiously, less powerful than the United States. Cold returned to his ship and quickly took off, but he had promised to return. There was indeed a sequel to this odd visitation. Actually, there was a number of sequels. The space entity, who later revealed his full name as Indrid Cold, came to Mr. Derenberger regularly, sometimes with 1 or 2 companions, but not always in UFOs. There were the inevitable visits in black motor cars. The alien pilot Indrid Cold told Mr. Derenberger that he came from the far planet Lanulos, situated in the depths of the Ganymede galaxy. Eventually, the honored Mr. Derenberger was transported by UFO to Lanulos, where he viewed several large cities. Like so many of his fellow contactees, he eventually wrote a book about his experiences. An important aspect of this encounter is that Mr. Derenberger submitted himself to intense psychiatric scrutiny as his fame and credibility became questionable, from which he received a clean bill of health. He was examined and scrupulously tested in December 1966 at St. Joseph's Hospital in Parkersburg, West Virginia. The final report implied he was a totally honest man with no hang-ups or mental abnormalities. He had obviously been in contact with some weird form of reality. Encounter 12. The last example to be examined is a personal one. It happened in the late 60s when the present writer was experiencing a dramatic change in emphasis between a political ethos and a mystical redirection. After this sighting, a letter was sent to a friend containing the following explicit description of the immediate events. While driving with my wife one evening during the autumn of 1969, we were shown both a vision and a sign in the sky. We were driving south out of London towards Dorking and had reached the Tolworth roundabout on the Kingston bypass. It was not quite dark, the air was very clear, and there was as yet no trace of the moon. At the same time, both my wife and I saw a huge, white disk shining in the sky in the middle distance ahead of us. It was about the size of a very large grapefruit, and as we slowed down to watch, its colors changed slightly to silvery gold with faint tinges of orange fire playing around the extreme edges. We slowed our car still more, and as we watched, we saw a string of small glowing disks appear on the left-hand side of the larger one. They flickered and twinkled with a pearly and opalescent glow, faintly mauve and very beautiful. After lining up in a perfectly straight formation, they gradually merged one by one into the large disk. Whatever it was, suddenly, with tremendous speed and in complete silence, the huge object moved from in front of our car to far behind it in a matter of seconds. We quickly stopped and got out. It now hung motionless in the distance, and as we looked up at it, a terrific feeling of peace, physical lightness, and spiritual happiness came over us, leaving us deeply moved. The strange aerial object next began moving very swiftly towards us, pulsating faintly, with a green light blazing on one side and a blue light on the other. It stopped again and hovered low in the sky to the northeast, then began to move slowly, quartering the air in precise, sweepingly geometrical lines, rather like a fish darting through water. It was tracing a definite pattern, star, in the sky, which had now become dark, and as we stared in wonder, it yet again stopped and hung like an exquisite, glowing jewel above us. Then suddenly it was gone. With unbelievable acceleration, it shot upwards into space and vanished into the now starry night. The whole sighting had lasted about 20 minutes, and yet it felt as though we had been watching for hours. This UFO is in many ways responsible for the appearance of this book some 10 years later. Despite what appear to be some UT undertones, if the foregoing cases are carefully scrutinized, many correlations of form and substance surface from the weird data. The contacts cited above are totally representative of thousands that have occurred since 1947, and the three main types of physical UFO are all clearly demarcated. The saucer disk, the cigar spindle, and the pyramid dome crop up in sightings with an uncanny regularity that gives a sense of continuity to this side of the overall picture. The highly technical nature of these specific UFO visitations does lend itself to the theory that in certain instances the varied phenomena are connected to the carefully judged easing in of humanity to a new frame of cultural recognition, a recognition of an advanced extraterrestrial civilization that is preparing us for a major contact in the near future. That is the generally accepted rationale behind the aliens from space aspect of the flying saucer mystery. It does seem that there are certain grounds for accepting this aspect of physical intervention and graduated culture shock, particularly in the light of recent statements from the French and American governments, which seem to recognize and have detailed knowledge of the growing importance of UFOs in the modern world order of thought. The human race currently being an extremely edgy species, it is understandable that any superior culture would have to tread very gently in its overtures towards any sociological or technological fusion. Too many entrenched and vested interests would prefer to remain big fish in a rather small pond. By spreading the contacts over several decades, not to mention centuries or even millennia, the inevitable culture shock would be considerably lessened when the final crunch came. That seems to be the most logical explanation for some of the more technical facets of the phenomenon. It is certainly a widely held viewpoint, but the plot can be considerably thickened when the metaphysical, dark god side of the situation is brought back into the general picture. It is the present contention that there are definitely two approaches to the UFO problem, and that both are almost certainly true. The first is that of contact between humanity and more culturally evolved aliens from other stars. The second is the dark gods, when humanity itself tentatively ventures out into the galaxy as it will surely do in the next few hundred years, it might well find cultures among the nearer stars that are below Homo sapiens in racial and intellectual development. Then we might be forced to adopt the same cautious approach of first contact as may now be occurring on our planet Earth. But equally, whether we go to them or they are coming to us, it is inevitable that when we meet on a proper civilized level of philosophical, technological, and even religious interchange, when the cosmic connection is finally and irrevocably made, we will probably find that our neighbors in space are, and always have been, constantly plagued with dark gods of their own. The real solution to the UFO enigma can be both physical and metaphysical. There need be no dichotomy. Hanging over all the elaborate and diverse civilizations that must scatter the universe, like the bright stars around which their planets cluster, lies the shadow of dark wings. Peering down on them all from rents in the very fabric of creation, the ultra-terrestrials may play an ever-present role in the unfolding of the cosmic drama. All the religions of Earth point to this disturbing truth, and there is little doubt that, at the core of any extraterrestrial religions we might soon encounter, the same source of evil and good will finally be uncovered. The overriding reality of UFOs will be seen to manifest on an archetypal, psychic level as an attempted control syndrome. This control syndrome tries to influence any civilization that aspires to come to terms with the cosmological patterns and purpose, and must therefore be viewed with great caution by any sentient species. The control appears to work through a careful programming of any belief system while conforming to a definite pattern and molding the physico-spiritual awareness of the recipient culture or species. The numerous phenomena manifest just outside any knowledge framework of the receivers, and yet they seem to have natural laws and formal interconnections of their own. These impinge on the reality consciousness of the various imbibers, rather like whiskey or any drug impinges on the neurocircuits of human beings and drastically alters rational perspective. The UFO or flying saucer aspect of this control syndrome incorporates as many psychic, magical, mythological, and paranormal components as it does the more overtly sociological and technological paradigms. It seems to be a very comprehensive control system indeed. If its true source is in the realms of the metaphysical, exteriorized here through the dark gods hypothesis, then the full cosmic connection becomes more readily apparent. Dr. Jacques Vallée, the well-known French ufologist, has written at length upon the psychic or paranormal facets of the phenomenon. Like John Keel, he has slowly come to accept the overview control explanation, and in his book The Invisible College, Dutton, 1975, called UFOs, The Psychic Solution in England, he states, I propose the hypothesis that there is a control system for human consciousness. I have not determined whether it is natural or spontaneous, whether it is explainable in terms of genetics, of social psychology, or of ordinary phenomena, or if it is artificial in nature and under the power of some superhuman will. It may be entirely determined by laws that we have not yet discovered. I am led to this hypothesis by the fact that in every instance of the UFO phenomenon I have been able to study in depth, I have found as many rational elements as I have absurd ones, and many that I could interpret as friendly, and many that seemed hostile. No matter what approach I take, I can never explain more than half of the facts. Dr. Valley is understandably confused by the apparent duality of the UFO mystery, for that is the main purpose of the exercise, while to expose this purpose is the hopeful objective of this book. The very fact that a trained scientist has been forced into this confusion by an objective study of the evidence, which admittedly is shatteringly elusive and conflicting, indicates that a metaphysical rationale is the correct framework within which to work. Dr. Vallée has found that UFOs definitely guide and regulate human beliefs, and his books contain many closely packed arguments and exact documentation to validate these points. He has also labored long in the timeless quarry of mythology and correlated the UFO myths of the past with the scientific myths of the present. In so doing, he further widens the strange panorama of external intervention in this planet's affairs and helps in assembling the complete pattern. It must be emphasized that Valley remains essentially a scientist and therefore is extremely cautious, almost hostile, to a genuinely metaphysical explanation of the weird phenomenon he studies. He seeks to explain the dilemma through postulating archetypal, paranormal powers that channel and manifest through the human collective unconscious, as recognized by Jung. Some researchers marry these undoubtedly existent powers to physical forces in nature, linked to geology and the electromagnetic sphere. But this almost simplistic explanation of UFOs and the paranormal seems far too parochial a viewpoint. Geodetic energies manifesting through Homo sapiens and electromagnetics are only three components in the unbelievably complex structure of the paranormal, as any study of the vast literature on occultism will prove. Because most scientists' rudimentary metaphysics seem based on the human beings as ultimate lords of creation heresy, the purely spiritual aspects of their findings lack a certain credibility. They are nearly all doggedly Newtonian in their scientific thinking, seeming to see the intricate poem of existence as a whirring, solipsistic machine. It is all boringly electromagnetic and mechanical, with humanity as the supreme engineer. This blinkered and evil thinking is yet another classic dark god seduction technique. In the opinion of the present writer, a scientist without a metaphysic is an intellectual eunuch. Without the true fire of an intuitive belief, there can be no life. Knowledge is not wisdom, and neither is any purely rational hypothesis definitive. The mischievous and deadly elementals of the occultist and the fleetingly sinister flying saucers of the scientist respectively play dangerous games with those living beings that are sensitive enough to perceive them. The evidence for this is somewhat overwhelming. The control force that lies behind its manifested agents is as much a tormenting mechanism as a revelatory one. As noted above, many of the psychic games perpetrated by this force are highly destructive to both the body and soul, the forms taken often being conducive to madness, anger, and despair. But they all collectively produce an awareness of cosmic perspective in the percipients, which can be controlled, channeled, and understood on an internal and liberating level. In this way, what can only be termed the cosmic balance is maintained. As much of the outer control force seems to be wildly paradoxical and banally silly, a well-developed sense of humor appears to be one of the most effective of the counter-controlling and defense mechanisms. Remember the old axiom, the devil, that proud spirit, cannot bear to be mocked. To laugh in the face of affliction might have found Job a quicker and greater favor with his God. But now it is time for Jeff Gilbertson to explain some of the phenomenal techniques that lie behind the masks adopted by our dark gods. Like everything else about this book, it makes for very uneasy but ultimately enlightening reading. Please stay tuned for the third part of this audiobook. As starseeds, we must remember to chew the meat and spit out the bones. Peace, blessings, and much love and enlightenment to you all. Shalom.